Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today for our Consolidated Appropriations Act and Notice 2021-15 update. We have a few things to update about the Consolidated Appropriations Act that came out at the very end of 2020. So we wanted to definitely just provide those to you this afternoon. My name is Casey Hope. I am the Director of Communications and Marketing at MedCom Benefit Solutions, and I am so glad that you guys joined us this afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. Just to let you know, a few housekeeping items. We are recording this presentation and we'll be able to send out a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck after the presentation concludes today. And as always, we will be having a Q&A session after the presentation ends so that you guys can ask any of the questions that you have on the material before we dismiss today. So as I said, this is being recorded. You will be able to access it after the presentation today. I'll make sure I send that out to you as soon as possible. So to get started, just to let you know, Michelle Barkey, of course, is with us. She is our Senior Legal Counsel at MedCom Benefit Solutions. And she is with us today to talk to us a little bit more about the Consolidated Appropriations Act. We have been here before with this presentation, but we do have a few updates today. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle.
Well, thank you very much, Casey, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's presentation. You know, last year about this time, we were just beginning to hit COVID and things were happening fairly quickly. The government declared a national emergency on the 13th of March. On the 2nd of May, I think it was, we got the outbreak period, which has now just been updated a little bit as well. And then towards June, we started to get Notice 2029, which told us what we could do with flexible spending accounts and DCAP programs. And we were really, really, really happy when that notice came out because there had been a lot of questions before that. And, you know, I think we were all thinking that things would kind of ease up once we hit the turn and we turned into 2021. And all I can tell you is that 2021 has started out with a bang, and we anticipate many, many, many more changes as the year progresses. So hang on to your hats for another great year. The Consolidated Appropriations Act was actually passed the end of December of 2021, and it had some information on FSAs as well as DCAPs, and kind of continued what Notice 2029 did. And then Notice 2021-15, really just a small little update, but we thought we would go through the whole thing again just so that there's no confusion. And plan documents is always a question that we get asked a lot of questions about. And then also things to consider. All of these things that we're talking about today are not mandatory. The employer can make the decision as to what they think is in their best interest and in the best interest of their participants. So again, there's a lot of flexibility. So let's go back to where we started with Notice 2029 back last June. And basically, we recognized last June that there was a lot of things going on with COVID. You know, individuals had, especially on calendar year plans, had taken elections for the full year and thought, you know, I can get these elective surgeries in and do everything. And the ones that were on non-calendar year plans had made the same decision the year before to get some services provided and potentially be able to claim it off of their FSA. And then all of a sudden in March, everything came to a screeching halt. And, you know, the government was concerned and they said, okay, we have to make some changes here so that nobody is going to lose benefits, or potentially they may want to augment the benefits they already had based on COVID. So basically what IRS 2020 for FSA and DCAP, it gave the ability of employers to allow flexibility for their employees if they wanted. So the employees would be able to make new elections or revoke an existing election, increase or decrease the amounts on the DCAPs and the FSAs. And it also allowed plans to permit unused funds to continue until December 31st of 2020. That wasn't so important for the calendar year plans, but for those non-calendar year plans where people might have been expecting to get a surgery or something early in the year, and then all of a sudden everything came to a screeching halt, it really was a good idea. And then they said, okay, special enrollment rights for health plans. This actually kind of started in a kind of a funky way. If you remember way back in March of last year, I think it was the week of the 21st, health plans all of a sudden, all the carriers, and it started with one in particular, and then everybody else followed suit, said, and this was particularly true for calendar year plans, hey, we'll hold another open enrollment, and we'll allow all your employees to make a new election, yes or no. And we started to get a lot of calls on that at that time, and they said, can they do that? And the answer was, well, they can, but under Section 125, where you have to make an election and it has to be good for the year, and unless there's a special qualifying event, the plans could have been in serious difficulties. But then again, we were talking about it, well, maybe the risks were low, et cetera, et cetera. But again, at the same time, there was that concern. What happens if we allow another open enrollment period and we allow members to enroll or disenroll, and there is no qualifying reason to do so, no special enrollment right? Well, then lo and behold, in June, Notice 2029 came out, and the government said, yeah, you can do open enrollments all you want. You can continue them now. You can do 10 a year if you want. You can do whatever you want for enrolling, disenrolling from the plan. And then they said, because they knew that this is what happened in March, they said, and oh, by the way, if you did it in March or if you did it retroactively, that's fine too, as long as it met the criteria. So basically, that's where we were in 2020, and we were rolling through, and we were hoping everything would come back to normal. But as we know, it did not. So that brought us to the Appropriations Act, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. And it was passed the end of December. And the government recognized that, hey, COVID is still going strong. There are still individuals that can't get the treatment that they want. There's still some states that are locking up and then locking down and then easing up and then locking down. So they recognized that we are still reeling from the effects of the coronavirus. And they recognized that to various degrees, individuals were afraid to go to the doctors and the dentists still, and that there are still all those precautions to take. So maybe the appointment range is not as good as it used to be either. So then they came up with a Consolidated Appropriations Act, and they said, we're going to make more changes for 2021 as well. So basically, they did pretty much what they did under Notice 2029. They provided flexibility for carryovers of any unused amounts. They said any unused amounts that you have on your FSA or DCAP programs at the end of 2020 can be carried over in 2021. And in 2021, it can be carried over to 2022. Now, if you were a plan that did not have a carryover, you could add a carryover to it. But they also gave you the ability, if you had a grace period and not a carryover, because don't forget, you can only have one or the other. But if your plan has a grace period, you could extend the grace period for 12 months for each plan year that ended in 2020 or 2021. So if you had a plan that goes from July each year, that July plan, you could carry over 12 months in 2020 to July of 2021, and then from July of 2021 into 2022. They also, and this one was the real confusing one, and I'm not really sure whether it is to anybody's real advantage to do this, but they said for anyone that had terminated their FSAs during the plan year 2020 or 2021, and typically terminated may mean that they quit the employment, or maybe they were even furloughed, or whatever the reason was, and that the FSA or the HSA came to a screeching halt. They said that you could carry over the amounts that you have to the end of the plan years, both in 2020 and 2021. So typically, as you know, with FSAs, the money ends the day that you terminate. Now you can carry it over to the end of 2021. One of the things that came out with that was, what do they carry over? Do they carry over the elected amount? Knowing that with the elected amount, some of that monies may not have already been contributed, or whether they just carry over the contributed amount. And the IRS basically left it up to the individual employers. They said, hey, you can do the contributory amount, or you can do the full amount. We would always recommend that you just do the amount that's contributed and not the full amount. And because then the employer will be out some bucks there, and maybe that's not fair. But if it does go to just the contributory amount, the IRS has now clarified that yes, if it's a contributory amount that you're allowing and it's been underspent, they would still be entitled to COBRA to get the full amount, and then they would continue to contribute. So that's basically what they said, that they said there. And then, of course, with the carryovers, you could also carry over in the DCA program the same as, the grace periods could be extended in the DCA as well. Now, the other thing that they said about the DCA for the DCAP programs is, we're going to add a little specialness here as well. If you have a child that's 13 and during the age of 13 and during the pandemic, they age out of DCAP, you can continue the DCAP till age 14. I don't know if this is really beneficial or not. As kids get older, they might not want to be in an aftercare program or whatever, but it might help some parents. So it is something that they actually put in. And so basically, we still had what we had under 2029, except it was extended through 2020 and 2021. And that's basically what we're saying here again, that it's just in the future, we can definitely allow those changes. Now, the Notice 2021-15 came out, and before Casey turns over this slide, just a quick question for you all to be thinking in your head. Did you notice anything that was lacking in the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was allowed under the Benefit Notice 2029? Because that's what 2021 did. It allowed the same things that were allowed under Notice 2029. And the thing that was missing in the Consolidated Appropriations Act was, drum roll please, Casey. We are now allowed to make prospective health changes on our health plans as well. And again, if you remember back under the 2029, your health plans and the health carriers allowing open enrollments, ta-da, we can do it again in 2021 as well. Issue is, the government can give us that right all we want, but unless the carriers agree to it, or the reinsurance carriers, if you're self-funded, it really doesn't matter, because we have to make sure that they buy in. And most of the time, they are not buying in. But just in case you have anyone that's allowed to make a special election change, or has, if you do have a carrier that would allow you to have another open enrollment, you can go ahead and do so. We are still getting questions sometimes about what about special enrollment rights. For example, a newborn baby that was born last September, can I add that baby to the plan now? And the answer is yes, but it's yes as long as you are not a government entity and you're covered under ERISA, and that is really not under the Appropriations Act, this act, but it's under the outbreak period. So lots of changes that we've had this year to keep separate. So plan documents, they did talk a little bit about plan documents as well. And basically, what the IRS is saying is we don't want you to be tied down to a plan document. We want you to be able to get the stuff done and then worry about the documentation later, but you have to do the documentation. So they said for plans year ending in 2020, anything that we did to amend this year, we have to have the amendments actually in writing by December 31st of 2021. And the same for plan years ending in 2021, we have until December 31st, 22 to amend the plan documents. We always recommend that we try to get them done as soon as possible. basically just because, you know, it's a good thing to communicate to our employees as well, or do some kind of notice to the employees so that they actually know where they stand at this time, whether or not they can make election changes or not. So things to consider, and we talked about this before. You know, if you're an employer and you're trying to decide whether or not you want to carry over some monies and the FSA from your plan year 2020 to the plan year in 2021, do you have participants that live in a state that has more of a lockdown? And of course, we always know that when FSAs are selected and that contribution amount goes in, you know, we're not paying payroll tax on it or FICA tax on it, so a Medicare tax on it, and the employee is not paying tax on it. So sometimes it's to our advantage to tell the employees, especially at an open enrollment, we're going to allow these changes if it becomes necessary, so that we can make sure that those FSAs and DCAP programs are still being utilized to the way that we want them to be utilized. Always check to see how your TPA handles fees. Are they going to handle additional fees for this? Some of the carrier, you know, some of the employers, you might want to adopt a wait and see attitude, especially if you're in a state that is wide open. I hear Texas and Mississippi are opening up again. Florida has been opened because maybe people are using the money, and perhaps what you want to do is, before you have to make up your mind, run a report, see where your employees are and whether it's to your employees' advantage to make some of these changes. And again, as we talked about with the group health plans, always make sure the carrier and the reinsurance carrier are going to agree if you're going to hold another open enrollment. So that's where we stand with the Consolidated Appropriations Act. We're back to being able to make all these prospective changes. Oh, and by the way, in 2021, if this notice didn't come out until pretty late, and also the Appropriations Act came out after some people went through open enrollment, so that the dollars could go back to January 1st if you were a calendar year plan. The changes could go back to the January. So do you have any questions?
Yes, Michelle, we have a couple of questions that have come through. I will go ahead and take this opportunity to let everybody know some of the other things that MedCom offers. So while you're thinking of those questions and typing them in, just know that, you know, MedCom does have a variety of solutions to offer partners and employers. We do ACA employer reporting and penalty appeal support. We also administer consumer-driven health plans and COBRA premium and billing administration. We are HIPAA privacy and security solutions training gurus. Michelle leads the way here for us, and so we can provide that for teams as well, and have a plethora of health and welfare compliance and actuarial solutions to offer. So those are just a few of the things that MedCom can help you out with. So going ahead and moving into the questions, Michelle, I have two so far. Our first question is the special enrollment where employees can enroll dependents after the typical 30-day period without a qualifying event required, or does it have to be adopted by the employer?
Read that one to me again, Casey.
Sure. Is the special enrollment period where employees can enroll dependents after the typical 30-day period without a qualifying event required, or does this have to be adopted by the employer?
Okay, that's really a two-pronged question. If the employee is in the outbreak period, for an example, the outbreak period commenced on March the 1st of 2020. And if the baby has been born anytime from March the 1st of 2020 to February 28th of 2020, they have a year to enroll the baby. So for an example, for a year, and then the 30 days to enroll the baby. So for an example, a baby that was born in September they would have until August the 31st and then potentially the 30 days after that to enroll that baby, because that's what their outbreak period would be. And the outbreak period is not subject to employer consideration, it is mandated. Outside of that, if you have a baby that is born and it's not in the outbreak period, for an example, the baby is born as of March 5th or yesterday, that is no longer a part of the outbreak period. At least, well, maybe I have to, that's not clear with the IRS. You might have to have employee consent and carrier consent, but as long as it's part of the outbreak period, there is no employer consent needed.
Thanks, Michelle. How do these changes affect currently furloughed staff?
Well, if they're still on the FSA and they're still making the contributions, it would be as if they were still an employee. If you've terminated them, you could allow the contributions to go to the end of the year, but it would have to be determined. I would have to know more information about how it was actually set up in the system. We have different employers doing different things with furloughed staff.
For the person who asked that question, feel free to reach out to us. I'll share our contact information after this Q&A session, and feel free to reach out to Michelle so that she can get a little bit more details about the specific situation. We have one other question right now. If an employer adds either unlimited carryover or extended grace period, does the employer have to hold a special open enrollment? If they do, would that have to extend to other lines of coverage?
You know, the IRS did not mention that you would have to hold an additional open enrollment. They just were going on what people already had, and they could make changes to it. So no, I don't think it would trigger, but I'm going to look at that one a little bit more carefully too, based on the other laws that we know we have out there. But I don't believe that in itself, based on what the IRS said, is going to open it up for everybody. Good question, though.
It is a good question, and we'll definitely reach back out with any further information that we're able to find. For the special enrollment during the outbreak period, can the carrier refuse to add the child? A lot of carriers indicate that the change has to be done within 30 days or fully insured plans, so the employer can challenge the carrier.
You know, I would definitely challenge the carrier on that. The government said this is what we need to do. I know some of the carriers are bulking, and it's all in the wording, but if I would definitely check with the carriers and fight it.
I think that makes sense. There's just a clarification here, Michelle. Open enrollment is not an ERISA mandate.
It is not an. It's not an ERISA. Under this, it is not an ERISA mandate. You can do it or not do it. All of these were voluntary by the employer.
Right. Okay. So that's all of the questions we have now. We can still take them if you guys get them in the questions panel. We're still happy to answer your questions. I will share here our contact information. If you think of anything after the webinar's over today and you really want to reach out to Michelle and ask her those questions or give her some more specifics to your situation, our contact information is on the screen, and we are happy to help, you know, as much as we possibly can. You know, as we said earlier this week in our outbreak period update, this information is coming out so fast and is getting updated almost daily. We are trying to stay up to date with that information and provide you guys that information as quickly as possible, but we all want to make sure that we understand it correctly and that we're communicating it correctly. So we appreciate your trust and joining us for today. Michelle, once again, thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge and your time with us. I will be sending out the recording and slide deck copy of the presentation as soon as possible. So thank you, Michelle, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of the week and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Casey.